Hey, I'm Mr. Terry, I'm your high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, if you've been paying attention, the reactors are now reacting to the other reactor because Vlogging Through History and I have done some original stuff recently. And you know we were going to be commenting and making reaction videos to those. He was nice enough to cover my 5 mysteries from history video. And today I'm covering his popular video, my favorite facts and stories about every US president. I know we'll get some great stuff here. He is such a good historian of US history. So I'm hoping to learn a lot. All right, of course, the original video is going to be linked down below. Please support him. All right, let's check it out. As more of a world history guy myself, I feel like we balance each other's content out very well. If you really want some really high-end, commentary on U.S. matters, he's so good at that, and I know we shared probably all the same subs. But yeah, let's do this.
Did you know that Herbert Hoover had a sport named after him called Hoover Ball that was invented to keep him in shape while he was president? Or that William Howard Taft did not get stuck in a White House bathtub?
I refuse to believe that. All right. I wanted to go to my grave knowing that our largest big boy president got stuck in the bathtub and needed help from some, I don't know, White House press secretary or something. Next thing he's going to tell me is that Teddy Roosevelt didn't actually ride a moose. Stop breaking my heart, Chris.
I've long been a fan of random facts like that about famous people, so I thought I would take you through some of my favorite stories and facts about every man who has ever served in the office of President of the United States.
I gotta step up my camera.
Despite people believing that he was your typical wealthy Virginia landowner, George Washington was known as land poor. That meant that he owned a great deal of land, but he didn't have the funds to maintain it or to develop it all properly. He was so cash-strapped.
Remember, land ownership was like the biggest driving force for people coming, to the U.S. I actually think it's the main reason why Thomas Jefferson, when going to the Declaration, was, quoting John Locke in that, our natural rights are life, liberty. Now, John Locke, coming out of Britain, said property, right? And it means so much more, I feel like, for Americans for Europeans than it would, like for Americans. In Europe, it's like, think about the whole imperial era, feudalism, and everything that's led to what it means to be a landowner. It's everything in European history, right? Your power and status in your life came from land ownership. And being able to own property was like owning your destiny. You know what I mean? I remember one of my professors, U.S. history, and when I was in college, was talking about, how Jefferson was life, liberty, pursuit of happiness and why change it, right? And he made a point that always stuck with me, that it was like, to like a European, especially coming from his context, like John Locke, owning property is happiness because it's so rare. Anyway.
Strapped that he had to borrow 600 pounds at a 6% interest rate from an Alexandria merchant named Richard Conway in order to travel to New York City for his own inauguration as president. When they were in England
now, if I remember right, though, he does inherit quite a bit from Martha's side, right? Like, especially with the slaves and things like that.
John Adams and Thomas.
By the way, just to plug something else, I had reacted recently to comic Shane Gillis, and that video's done really well. And he's like a big history buff, but he's a comedian. He did a whole segment I reacted to that was about his trip to Mount Vernon, and it is hilarious. I'll try to remember to link it here after the video.
Jefferson visited William Shakespeare's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon, and they chipped off a piece of one of his chairs as a souvenir. Jefferson is also the only American president who served as vice president under someone else who served as vice president. And of course, everyone's favorite Jefferson and Adams fact, they both...
Remember that weird, dumb law we had in early American history? If you didn't know this, the vice president used to be the runner-up in the presidential election. It was like to make everybody happy, even though obviously if they have different, very, very different, political ideas that could cause kind of rift. But that was a thing in early American history. Oh, yes. And then their death.
Died on the same day, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1826. Yeah.
It just seems like so American to have that. 2 of your founding fathers die on the 4th of July. It's like, no wonder we went with the 4th of July as our Independence Day, even though things were agreed upon like in the last 2 days before that.
Madison was introduced to his future wife, Dolly Payne, by fellow Princeton graduate Aaron Burr. He was also our smallest president at 5 feet 4 inches tall and about 100 pounds. Madison was also the first president.
I feel like I was Mr. Beat year or two ago invited me to be on a video about him. It was like interesting facts or whatever about presidents, and he had me on, and I remember I put that in there too, that he was the shortest, and then I made sure to do with Lincoln, you know, he was the tallest. So but Madison also kind of given the job of drafting the Constitution.
Still
doesn't mean he like made it up, but you know, actually organizing it
when he left office. James Monroe nearly died from a serious wound suffered at the Battle of Trenton. Had he died, he would have been the only American killed in action during that battle. He actually died on July 4th, 1831 in New York City and was originally buried there.
But
his body
I did not know Monroe
27 years later and reburied at Hollywood Cemetery.
Okay, new rule. Sorry, presidents. If you're going to croak for whatever it is that gets us, we also come to death one day. Sorry, it's got to be 4th of July. Otherwise, it really brings you down a notch.
John Quincy Adams was the first president to be interviewed by a woman. Her name was Anne Royal, but she only secured the interview because she stole his clothes while he was skinny dipping, something he was known to do. Adams is also the earliest president for whom we have an actual photograph.
He's so scary looking. I've seen this photo. He looks like a hobbit. It's like a more evil hobbit, though. Like, gosh.
Though it was taken years after he left office. Andrew Jackson was well known to have had a parrot whose vulgar language was such a problem that it actually had to be removed from Jackson's funeral service in 1845.
Because, you know, parrots, right? They pick up what you say, and Jackson, pretty foul dude that way. Just, I wonder what the words were, though. I want to know. Does anybody have it? Let me know down below. What were the actual curse words that he's like, beep?
Martin Van Buren was the only president for whom English was not his first language. He grew up speaking Dutch. Yeah. He was also the first president who was born an American citizen.
Didn't he know a ton of languages too, if I want to remember, right? Like maybe the one that knew the most. I mean, if you were born at, you know, well, he's born American citizen, but like probably spent a lot of time with a lot of different language groups. If anyone knows that part, let me know.
All previous presidents had been born British subjects. William Henry Harrison was the son of a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the only president who was grandfather to another president. He gave the longest inaugural address in history at over 8,400 words, which is nearly 4 times as long as the average inaugural address throughout history. But in just 1 month, he had the shortest term of any president. John Tyler had 15 children.
Has anyone done the math? Like what percentage of his presidency was actually giving his inauguration speech? All right, John Tyler. He's the one though that was like, wasn't he the one that was really old? Like he lived around, he had kids at a really old age, but then his like kids had old age, and it was like only a few years ago there was like a grandchild or something crazy like that because of how spaced out the births were.
Any other president. And because he was in his 60s when the youngest was born, and that child had children into his 70s, John Tyler, born in 1790, has a grandson still living as of 2023.
That's so
James Knox
that's
Polk
nuts.
banned alcohol, dancing, and playing
So for some reason, why I knew that fact, I don't know who was behind it, but there were a bunch of billboards. Somebody had paid, like ad agency, whatever, billboards, like outside, right? Like you'd go on drive on the road or the freeway. And I saw multiple of those. And it just had that fact. And I don't know if that was a front for something, because I think there was a website. I never went to it after that. I don't know if it went down to some like weird, like some computer virus thing or something, but I never did follow up with that though.
From the White House when he was president. Knox Polk banned alcohol, dancing, and playing cards from the White House when he was president. He's also the only man to ever serve as both Speaker of the House of Representatives and President of the United States. As a career military officer, Zachary Taylor had never voted in a presidential election before becoming president himself. He was also the father of Confederate General Richard Taylor and the father-in-law of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Millard Fillmore
met he's doing some good facts there. By the way, it's such a good delivery right now and stuff. He's doing such a good job with this. Loading the facts, great B-roll. This is really like high quality.
Your wife, Abigail Powers, when he was a teenager and she was his teacher. While in office, President and Mrs. Fillmore established the first White House library.
Okay, so that's kind of weird. I'm a teacher. That'd be like marrying a student. I'm sure that was a lot less weird back then.
At the age of 12, Franklin Pierce was sent off to school in a nearby town. He was no fan of the schooling, and so he grew homesick and walked the 12 miles back to his home one Sunday. His father fed him dinner and drove him part of the distance back to school before ordering him to walk the rest of the way in a thunderstorm.
Dude, literally the walking up, to school both ways things. Did he say it was 12 miles to his school?
Back to school before ordering. His father fed him dinner and drove him part of the distance back to school before ordering him to walk the rest of the way in a thunderstorm. Pierce later cited this moment as the turning point of his life. Now, despite having lost his only remaining child in a horrible train accident just weeks earlier, Franklin Pierce was the first president to give his inaugural address without any notes. James Buchanan
just did material, huh? Just did material. I feel like Trump could do that. Like he loves, to speak. Because like you grow up in front of the media and stuff like that. Well, to be honest, though, I would say actually almost any president, I think post television era. So let's start with like television in every home era. I'm thinking like at least starting with JFK. Like you have to be able to innovate on the spot and could probably do that. But yeah, it was probably a lot harder for these guys. Just because they didn't have that.
He was the only president who was never married, and he was the last president born in the 18th century. Abraham Lincoln was a legendary wrestler, having lost only one match out of 300, and that opponent may have cheated to win.
Oh, really?
He's a member of the Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Born in Kentucky, Lincoln was also the first president not born in one of the original 13 states.
I think it was a territory then for where he was, but like, is that what I said? God, it's been so long since I was in the Mr. Beat video. I feel like I did that with like he was tallest and then Wrestling Hall of Fame, I think.
Andrew Johnson was 18 years old when he married 16-year-old Eliza
Everyone's
McCarter.
favorite president.
The Justice of the Peace who performed the ceremony was Mordecai Lincoln, a first cousin of Abraham Lincoln's father. Johnson was drunk at his inauguration as vice president in 1865, and all three of his sons died in their 20s or 30s as a result of chronic alcohol abuse. While in office,
the whole thing was what is it with like a Kennedy Johnson? What's that one? I remember that meme where it was like, Kennedy and Andrew Johnson. Lincoln and Andrew Johnson had a bunch of similar things, like different people that they knew. As well as like Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. What was that whole meme again? All right, Grant.
Ulysses S. Grant signed legislation creating Yellowstone National Park,
Thank you.
the Justice Department, and the National Weather Service.
Love me some national
His tomb in Manhattan is the largest mausoleum in the Western Hemisphere.
That thing's sweet.
Rutherford B. Hayes was the first president to have a telephone in the White House. He refused to serve alcohol while he was president, so his wife would serve lemonade instead. This led to her nickname, Lemonade Lucy. James Garfield could write Latin with one hand and Greek with the other at the same time.
I've heard of people that did this.
Latin with one hand and Greek with the other at the same time.
Okay, so first off, knowing those two languages is incredible. That means this guy had a very traditional education, like old school. When it's like even like Latin, a dead language, you still learned it, right? Because it's Rome. It's like foundation of Western culture and all that stuff. And then Greece, right, daddy of all Western civilization, pretty much. But I've heard of people that can do this, and I don't know if it's some like something you could practice to do, but writing on two hands, and of course doing it in two languages is mind-blowing. But I've heard of just people that can do that. I've seen and heard of like teachers, for example, not very many. I've heard like one or two ever, but like could write on the whiteboard and write with both hands, right? Like write one sentence over here, one sentence over here or something. I don't know if you have to have some kind of crazy like mental, I don't know what it is, but to be able to do that, if something you could practice or something you just inherently have some crazy skill where you can like compartmentalize your brain like that.
He was one of the most brilliant men to ever hold the office of president, and he was our only president who was also an ordained minister. Chester Arthur was known for an outlandish sense of fashion. He was said to have owned 80 pairs of pants and 80 pairs of shoes.
Let's go.
And would change clothes multiple times every single day, including into a tuxedo for dinner. He was diagnosed with a fatal kidney disease shortly after becoming president, and he died around a year and a half after leaving office. Upon the death of his law partner, Grover Cleveland became the legal guardian to his friend's 11-year-old orphaned daughter, Frances Folsom. 10 years later, they were married at the White House, making her the youngest first lady ever at the age of 21. Cleveland was 49.
Also, rare case. Believe with Cleveland, right, was not president for the next term, but then was president later, right? So you can do, of course, multiple terms, but you couldn't do them back to back. You couldn't do or you can do it back to back. Sorry, there weren't term limits back then, but he was the only person to have that like space in between. And of course, things changed with FDR when. He was, elected 4 times. Now you can only be elected twice, but they do not have to be consecutive terms.
Benjamin Harrison was the first president with electricity in the White House, but he was so terrified of being electrocuted from touching the light switches that he'd often go to bed with the lights still on. William McKinley was the first president.
Jumping in there, would it have been like AC or DC going through like the White House? It got me thinking about how something that Thomas Edison was trying to do to hurt Nikola Tesla was to try to market that AC power was a lot more dangerous. Had that whole thing about they electrocuted that elephant, Topsy the elephant, like killed an elephant with electricity to show it. But yeah, I would have been super apprehensive about early electricity. I mean, you hear about electricity being start of fires very rarely, but think about how much more dangerous it would have been back then.
President to ride in an automobile and was even transported by ambulance to the hospital after being shot in 1901. The surgery there was performed by an OBGYN who was the only surgeon available, but who had no experience with that type of abdominal wound.
He survived.
The bullet that killed the president was never found, not even in the autopsy.
No. So yeah, he was assassinated. First, well, we've only had a handful now, right? But with him, he's like ultra capitalist dude, and had a lot of haters, especially from like working class anarchists. That's the guy who ended up killing him. I forgot his name, but he was like an anarchist basically. Also with McKinley, that election, was, I guess if you want to, change like inflation, how much money was worth, the most biggest campaign funding like ever. McKinley had so many of these huge investors. He was basically just able to outspend. And that meant a lot back then when it was so hard to get media and to get that back then, it wasn't as available that you had to kind of pay for that exposure. He kind of bought the White House, was able to.
Theodore Roosevelt wore a ring containing a lock of Abraham Lincoln's hair at his inauguration.
Weird.
He walked his niece Eleanor down the aisle in her 1905 marriage to future President Franklin Roosevelt, their distant cousin. And of course, Theodore...
There is a relationship there, between FDR and Eleanor. They're deeper cousins.
Roosevelt gave a campaign speech just minutes after being shot in the chest. He finished the speech.
That's one of the
William Howard Taft.
That's one of the most bad stories ever. Gets shot, right? Gets shot and keeps the bullet in. It's in his body as he was giving a speech. Dude, Teddy was tough, man. Rough Riders, right? Spanish-American War. Dude,
he was the last president.
Especially for being basically a city boy. He's the Roosevelts. They're New York City folks, but like tough, rugged, love the outdoors, of course. You hear about him and also his big influence over national parks and stuff like that. So anyway.
Keep a cow on hand at the White House to provide fresh milk. He was a White House Solicitor General at the age of 32, a federal judge at 34, and twice turned down appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court before becoming president. After he left office, he became Chief Justice in 1921.
That's such a weird thing to me to think about. Think about a former president being a justice, like a former president. that seems so weird. You'd think it'd be so like politically motivated. You'd wonder if, how much opposition from like opposition parties from, what political party there would be, right? Because, the justices are supposed to be like impartial and all that stuff, but like you very clearly know their politics before because they were president. I'd like to learn more about what kind of getting him kind of like ratified, getting him approved, kind of how that went down.
And of course, he did not get stuck in a bathtub at the White House.
Fake news, Chris.
Woodrow Wilson was the only man with a PhD.
So if you're into the VTH lore, you know how much he hates Woodrow Wilson, and it's like a meme now of how much he hates. I mean, yes, I know it's very popular across the whole history community to Woodrow Wilson, but like I feel like so much of it I heard louder early on, like very early on in his kind of, social media career here. But yeah.
To be elected president. And he's the only president buried in Washington, D.C.
He's also, I do have to shout out this, he was a teacher, just like myself.
Now, though he had been married for nearly 30 years when he took office, Warren Harding was known to have had affairs with at least two.
Oh, by the way, I gotta tell you a joke. Okay, so a guy I've gotten to know, if you're into football and YouTube, you know who Tom Grossi is. Okay, Packers fan, super fun. We hope to collaborate here in the future. He used to be a high school history teacher, and he was on stream, and we were talking. And I'm a Vikings fan. He's a Packers fan. He hates them. He roasted me pretty good because we were talking about presidents and like bad presidents and stuff. And he got me good on one. He's like, well, Woodrow Wilson was, he was married twice. So technically Wilson has 2 more rings than the Vikings. And it shut me up. By the way, I hope I'm looking for a collab once he's done with his stuff. He's doing the NFL draft stuff. Tom Grossi, hilarious comedian, but former history teacher. I'm hoping to work with him here in the near future.
Years when he took office, Warren Harding was known to have had affairs with at least 2 women. One of them was paid $25,000 by the Republican Party to keep quiet after Harding was nominated in 1920. The other was a woman named Nan Britton, who claimed in a book...
This might sound weird and maybe cynical. Do you think most presidents have been adulterous? Like over 50%, you think? What would be a percentage in a like your most cynical projections there?
Look, years after Harding's death, that he fathered a child with her shortly before becoming president. In 2015, DNA confirmed that child, a daughter named Elizabeth, was indeed Harding's only child. Calvin Coolidge had a deep concern for his own health. As part of his daily routine, President Coolidge would eat breakfast in bed while a White House staffer rubbed Vaseline on his head.
Like a germaphobe.
Coolidge also had 2 pet raccoons, Reuben and Rebecca, that would sometimes run free through the White House.
Okay, so I mean that's gross. If you're worried about your health, you don't want the scavenger animals. Okay, literal, gross.
As director of the American Relief Administration, Herbert Hoover was responsible for saving the lives of millions of Europeans from starvation in the aftermath of the First World War. He and his wife also spoke Mandarin Chinese, and they would often use the language when they didn't want other people to eavesdrop on their conversations. Franklin Roosevelt was gifted a BB gun for his 11th birthday. Eventually, he would shoot, stuff, and mount more than 300 different species of bird.
Okay, so is that like, they say the whole, like, of course, like, children killing animals thing is a sign of, like, a future psychopath serial killer. I feel like that has, like, in olden days, people just got a pass for that because it's just, like, part of your boyhood was you got a gun from your dad and you went out and shot stuff.
Once received a letter requesting an American $10 bill from an ambitious 14-year-old in Cuba named Fidel Castro.
This is a fantastic video.
While hundreds of women gathered in the Blue Room at the White House, the ceiling and a 1,200-pound chandelier nearly collapsed on them.
Oh,
above them, President Harry Truman was bathing, wearing nothing but his reading glasses. That nearly horrifying incident led Truman to order a nearly $60 million renovation to the presidential mansion. Now, though he was one of the most famous generals in American history and served as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe during the Second World War, Dwight Eisenhower never personally experienced combat. While president, Ike spent nearly 2 months in a hospital in Denver.
And that's, again, that's nuts because he leads D-Day, leads literally millions of troops. He was able to be in command also of like the British but made huge plans. One of the ones that probably saved a lot of American lives was his decision basically to not try to pursue a race to Berlin with the Soviet Union. He was one that was, I think, he was, I think, very realistic. I feel like for World War II, like for one, he, though he's basically in charge, like for D-Day, was not confident it was going to work. You can see it's published. Go ahead and look this up. Dwight Eisenhower's basically press release that he had planned for if D-Day failed. He was not 100% confident it was going to work. Like, I think he was being realistic that way. But then also as the war was progressing and the war was going a lot better, of course, for the Allies, decision to basically not go to Berlin and pretty much just kind of have some troops just defer to different parts of Germany or sit tight. His whole idea was, hey, the Battle of Berlin is probably going to be insanely bloody. And also remember that there were agreements before World War II ended about how Germany was going to be divided up. So it wasn't just going to be like a finders keepers kind of thing. But he was basically like, hey, Stalin, the Soviets want to die by how many, billions or whatever it could potentially take to finish that war out. And maybe not up to millions, but like Berlin could have been, like another Stalingrad kind of thing. He was like, let them die, pretty much. So
after suffering a heart attack, Ike spent nearly 2 months in a hospital in Denver after suffering a heart attack. With his approval, his vice president, Richard Nixon, ran cabinet meetings back in Washington. John F. Kennedy.
And it's so easy to forget how long Nixon was in very high positions. Because, like, you think of him as president, like in the 70s, but dude was in the 50s. Like, as vice president, like, he's up in that upper tier so long. He looks so young too when you go in like the 1960 election cycle with JFK and you watch their debates. He just looks so much younger, than obviously he was going to be when he eventually gets elected president.
Only president to have received a Purple Heart Medal for wounds received in action against the enemy. He had his back injured when the boat he was commanding was rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer. Though he was injured, he swam nearly 3 miles, dragging a severely burned member of his crew to safety by pulling the man's life jacket with his teeth. Lyndon Johnson was in the Naval Reserve during World War II and was set to fly as an observer aboard a B-26 known as the Wabash Cannonball.
Lyndon Johnson was very much kind of like an offshoot of FDR too, kind of working close with him. And you can kind of see that when you look at things like the Great Society and these things that almost look like a new deal. I feel like Lyndon Johnson very much was like, from that branch.
During a mission in 1942. Before takeoff, Johnson had to go to the bathroom. When he returned, his observer spot on the Wabash Cannonball had been taken by another officer. He was forced to board another plane as an observer. The plane he was originally on was hit during the mission, caught fire and crashed into the water, killing everyone on board. A bathroom break saved Johnson's life. At 39 years old, Richard Nixon was the second youngest man ever elected vice president. He's also one of only 2 men, along with Franklin Roosevelt, to appear on a national presidential ticket 5 separate times.
That's right.
He was elected vice president in 1952 and 1956.
It's so interesting because you feel sometimes, you feel like you would think like politicians kind of get like one shot. You know what I mean? And if it doesn't work out, especially when you go in for president, you kind of are done. You're like, all right, I had my shot. The people don't like me. I'm going to move on with their lives. You don't see that very much. I mean, there's a handful, of course, of guys that keep coming back, but like to have it come back, but then actually win a good like 15 years basically from like when you're out before and had tried
lost the presidential election of 1960 and then won the elections in 68 and 72. Gerald Ford is the only Eagle Scout to become president. He won 2 national championships as a member of the University of Michigan football team and turned down offers from the Detroit Lions and Green Bay Packers to play in the NFL. He saw combat as a gunnery officer on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific during World War II and was once nearly swept overboard during a typhoon.
Also probably had the most unique, well, definitely most unique path to presidency ever, right? Because it was whole like Nixon scandal, and then like vice president is booted out, and then you get like Speaker of the House, and kind of coming a totally untraditional route, that he ends up getting there. And then of course famously becomes president, pardons Nixon.
Another Navy officer was Jimmy Carter. He's the only president who is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy.
So many. I feel like, I wonder, is that era over, you feel like, where presidents, it was almost like you were required to be in the military. It's like it added something that people just respected. And it seemed like for so long in history, it was, I don't want to say a prerequisite, but it like almost was. To get full respect.
He qualified.
Otherwise, you might be seen as like a draft dodger or something, or some kind of wimp, and
as a submariner, and was set to serve on one of the very first American nuclear submarines when he resigned from the Army to save the family peanut farm. Because of his service record, the Seawolf class submarine USS Jimmy Carter was commissioned in his honor in 2005.
It looks like a pirate flag. That would be cool.
Early in his life, Ronald Reagan spent 7 years as a lifeguard in Dixon, Illinois, beginning at the age of 16. During that time period, he saved the lives of nearly 80 people. 5 decades later, President Reagan would show Oval Office visitors a photo of the river where he lifeguarded in Dixon, and would often tell them that it was one of the best jobs he ever had. At one point,
one thing I've never watched is a Ronald Reagan movie. I've seen, clips, because of course, if you didn't know, he was like a pretty famous actor. But I've never seen a movie other than just seeing like a little bit of clips. You guys got to are there actually like some really good ones I should check out?
The 1988 presidential election, George H.W. Bush trailed Democratic nominee Michael Dukakis by nearly 20 points in the polls. According to then campaign manager and later Secretary of State James Baker, Bush was looking to shake things up with his VP pick. With that in mind, he briefly but seriously considered the Republican mayor of Carmel, California as his running mate. That mayor was none other than Dirty Harry himself, Clint Eastwood. Bill Clinton was the first Democrat elected to consecutive terms as president since Franklin Roosevelt.
Wow. Yeah, because he got like Carter since FDR, huh?
He was also the only president who was a Rhodes Scholar. And at the age of 16, he pushed through a crowd of boys to get his photo taken while shaking the hand of President John F. Kennedy just a few months before his 1963
Hillary
assassination.
In college too, I believe.
George W. Bush is the only U.S. president to be the father of twins. He also holds the record for both the highest and lowest presidential approval ratings ever recorded.
That's so interesting because it's like, okay, the high came right after 9/11, right? Became this leader unifying everybody, and it was such a traumatizing event for the Americans that his very aggressive wording and all this stuff was appreciated, and it was seen as bold and powerful and all that stuff. But then it's amazing as like how hyped people I guess were for the beginning of that response to 9/11. Then you're going to get the wars when they actually come out. You're going to get Afghanistan. You're going to get Iraq. And then it's just like a total 180 and having one of the lowest in history. Crazy.
92% in 2001 and 19% in 2008.
That's so
Barack Obama's first job was at a Baskin Robbins as a teenager in Hawaii. He ate so much ice cream that he hasn't eaten it since. He's an admitted Harry Potter fan, having read all 7 books.
He's a nerd.
And had a basketball court placed onto the White House tennis court.
I've seen him play. He's kind of got like he's left-handed, and so I'm a basketball coach. He's got, his form isn't very good. Like you should not be if you're left-handed, the ball should not be that way, and you should not be shooting on that side of your body. But like I've seen him hoop a little bit, and he's got a handle. He's more like he's a ball handler. He's like dropping dimes and assists. But yeah, he could hoop
in office. Man. Donald Trump's grandfather was a cousin of H.J. Heinz, the founder of the company famous for its ketchup. He was also the 3rd tallest president, coming in just under Abraham Lincoln and Lyndon Johnson.
Oh my gosh. Have you guys seen Barron recently? Holy crap. So he was this tiny little kid, when he was first in office. He's huge. Look at the picture. He dwarfs his dad. I don't know. He might be like 6'10" or something. It's crazy. I don't know what happened, but.
Born on November 20th, 1942, Joe Biden was born closer to Abraham Lincoln's inauguration than to his own 2021 inauguration.
That's such a good fact. That's so funny. You're so old, Joe.
Inauguration as president.
That's awesome.
There you have it. Some of my favorite facts and stories about
this
every
so
U.S.
good.
president. If you'd like to see more
of my
videos about the presidents, I'll throw up some links to a playlist and to a video you might find interesting that I did a while back. Thanks for watching.
All right, that was a fantastic video. That's as good as any of the big YouTubers, especially ones that get on screen and talk facts and stuff like that. Fantastic. I really hope you guys, you know, like the thing, and he and I talk about this too. I don't want to call it disheartening, but like we also love to make like original stuff. And, you know, for us getting our popularity doing commentary and other history videos, you know, those videos are reaction commentary videos obviously do very well. But we also want to make, you know, original stuff. But we also got to make sure we're doing stuff that people want to see. So I really hope that when you guys see him put out one of the original videos, check it out. He's already done the vlogs, and the vlogs are incredible. They're so good. He's so good on site, and he goes to all these amazing locations historically, but some of this like studio produced scripted kind of, you know, content, I think it's so cool. And I hope you guys are doing that. And hopefully by watching this, you saw like how good, you know, I can guarantee things will be in the future. And it definitely helps us and gets us motivated to branch out and, you know, try new things and stuff like that and share more of our own, you know, historical passions with you directly. So thanks again for supporting us. Again, this original video is down below. Make sure you support it. Check out the other stuff, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.